workshop again.
Hey everybody, thanks for your patience. This will be hopefully resolved. I just sent an email out, so we're going to try and get as many participants back in here as we can. So we will restart in another 2 to 3 minutes. We had Naveen talking about our equity supplement, and I believe we were responding to Marissa Brown from GLI. So we will pick up with that conversation momentarily. Thank you for your patience.
Hey, Kayla, can you hear me? Just wanted to confirm.
Yeah, I can hear you, Naveen.
Thanks.
Okay, I'm seeing our participants list go up, which is a good sign. I'm hoping everyone else is logging back on. Thanks everyone who's joining us. In case you missed it, we just had some technical difficulties with our Zoom account. So we're able to get back up and running. We'll pick up from where we left off in a few minutes. Hopefully you can tell your people that got kicked off too, let them know we're back on, they can get back on, and we'll continue as usual. Hi, everyone that's joined us. Thanks for your patience. We had some technical difficulties with our Zoom account, so we're going to pick up here in a minute or two. I'm seeing our participants list go back up, which hopefully is a good sign, and that you've been able to tell anyone you know that got kicked off to rejoin us. So we'll pick up from where we left off and continue as usual and wrap up the workshop when the bean section is done. Naveen, I see Marissa Brown joined. Would you like me to have them restate their question before we move on, or?
Sure, I think since everybody got kicked off, it might be good to refresh. I know the question, but I don't want to just dive into the answer. So Marissa, if you wouldn't mind coming off mute to maybe restate that question you asked, and I'd be happy to answer it from the top again.
Okay, Marissa, you should be able to speak now.
Sure. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, awesome. Never been kicked off of Zoom from an agency before, so that's new.
Hey, Marissa,
But
neither have we. So I I need to tell my team that was pretty good troubleshooting in the heat of the moment. Thank you for being so patient with us.
sure. Yeah, so as we all know, CTC funding for various TCEP projects is leading to increased vehicles miles traveled in communities of color and low-income communities, thus aggravating serious air pollution issues. And so my question is, with that framing, knowing that the tools, the equity tools in Section A are they're just a tool or a resource. They're not a requirement, so there's no accountability to them. What's then the incentive for applicants to utilize them?
So thank you, Marissa. Again, I want to reiterate, I appreciate you being patient. You asked a good question, and then we just pieced out in the middle of that. So sorry about that. Seriously, that was so random. But as I was responding to your question before, again, great question. We've stated this in previous workshops and program workshops, and I know we have different attendees for each of our workshops, and I discussed this in the March 27th equity workshop in detail as well. The incentive is that the community engagement criterion is embedded into every single SB1 program guideline. That includes the local partnership program, the trade corridor enhancement program, and the solutions for congested corridors program. So when applicants respond to those that criterion in each of those applications, whether they're submitting an application for each one of those programs or whether they're submitting a joint combined application, they have to respond to that criterion as part of that. And I'll cover that criterion at the end of this presentation, so please stay tuned for that. In that, we ask the same questions that we ask in the equity supplement under the introduction and intent sections that I was sharing earlier, where we lay out very specific questions to help guide applicants to determine whether they're building an effective community engagement plan, whether they have effective public engagement, inclusion and engagement strategies, and just to help them guide their framework on how they can get started. So the equity supplement, like I was saying before, was developed to guide that process because a lot of our applicants and agencies were very new to this process, or they're very small and didn't really have a place to build from. So the supplement was supposed to be an amalgamated resource for them to pull information from, and then they can choose the tools and resources that best fit the needs for the projects for which they're seeking funds and developing that engagement plan. So speaking for SCCP and TCEP, since we're in the TCEP workshop right now, the projects that are submitted in these two programs tend to be like multi-billion-dollar long-term projects with several smaller segments. And each of those segments sometimes are in the same community, but oftentimes are in different areas of that corridor. So each of those communities are then kind of treated a little bit differently based on which segment of the project that they're in. So a long way of saying that the incentive is that if they want to perform well on the community engagement criterion, they have to demonstrate that they made an effort to include the communities, include leadership, build those relationships, they engaged with them during the project development and nomination cycle. And I will also say for the evaluation portion of those applications, it isn't just Commission and Caltrans staff that review and evaluate these applications. The Interagency Equity Advisory Committee membership also reviews the good responses to the community engagement criterion because they are subject matter experts in that area, and they also provide their ratings. So it requires our applicants to provide a very full picture to be considered competitive in that particular criterion, to be able to compete for program dollars and funds, essentially. Hopefully that answers your question. Let me know if you have any follow-ups.
Yeah, thank you so much. That does answer my question. And then just as a follow-up, so for the community engagement criteria piece, is that given a greater weight than within the application?
Well, it's different. So I can speak for SCCP first, and then I will give it to Kayla and Matthew to talk a little bit about TCEP. And SCCP, that program is a little bit different. The primary objective of that program is in the name itself, Solutions for Congested Corridors program. So the primary objective for all applications to compete, the weighted criterion, are the congestion evaluation criteria. That does include some accessibility and community engagement requirements embedded within that section, but it's separate from the other evaluation criteria that includes community engagement. So that congestion evaluation criteria is weighed a little bit more heavily than all of the other criteria that we look at. That is not to say that community engagement is not considered important or it's equally weighted. Each of the project applications have a chance to perform on every single criterion that's embedded within our guidelines. But for you to perform well on any of those criteria, you have to provide data, you have to provide metrics, and you have to provide supporting narrative to be able to be considered competitive in response to that criterion. That said, there has been a greater focus on equity and community engagement, especially since the start of our programs, but especially within the last 2 cycles. I want to say starting from the end of cycle 2 up to now, the development of cycle 4. And our applicants themselves have expressed a need and a concern for weighing in on that criteria a little bit more deeply and thinking about it more broadly than they have been maybe in past cycles. So it's like a yes and no answer almost. I'll pause here and see if Kayla and Matthew want to add anything specifically for TCEP, since this is a TCEP workshop.
Yeah, Naveen, I'll chime in because I know that this has also been a question. Freight projects involve, heavy trucks, which are among the largest polluters in the state, and so the community engagement criteria is one of our community impact factors, which is one of several evaluation criteria in the Trade Corridor Enhancement Program. However, I can tell you that we're not just looking at community engagement, we are also looking at harms and proximity to disadvantaged communities across different evaluation criteria. So while this one evaluation criteria may be one of many, there are several community impact factors that collectively hold significant weight in the TCEP program. So I can't say that, there will be, a prohibition on certain types of projects being implemented in different, regions or parts of the state. However, there's increasingly more weight provided to projects that are not perpetuating or promoting or creating harm in disadvantaged, underserved, marginalized communities using, Cal EnviroScreen ratings and some of the others that we have listed in the equity supplement. So I hope that answers your question. I know it's not, it's not just a yes answer, but there's a lot of different moving parts at play with that particular concept.
Yeah, thank you so much for that answer. And I would just say for communities of color and people who have, bear the brunt of pollution, the answer to my question essentially is no. That there is not given more weight to community engagement and the harms and the proximity of these highway projects, that they are not given more weight and not prioritized. But thank you so much for your complex answer, and I look forward to following up after.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments on this particular slide or anything before this?
Naveen, I'm not seeing any. Oh, we do have a hand raised. Mike Woodman, you should be able to speak once you're unmuted.
Thank you. This is Mike Woodman with the Nevada County Transportation Commission. And just maybe for that last question, to provide perspective from a former, project applicant, I think the equity resources really assist us as applicants in making sure we're correctly identifying the disadvantaged communities. And then two, also, as we're putting together the application, a competitive application will take into consideration and answer the questions that are required in the application that you brought up. How does the project improve accessibility? How does the project reduce air quality impacts within a certain corridor? So it really informs the applicant of the potential, disadvantaged community area, potential impacts, and really how we can, identify through our application how we're trying to reduce the impacts and have positive benefits on those communities. So it's very helpful for the applicant, and the competitive applications do answer those questions.
Thank you for your comment, Mike. As always, really appreciate hearing from you. I missed you on the STCP workshops. Don't know why you've left us there, but I just wanted you to know I appreciate your feedback, as always. And like Matthew said earlier, before I move on to the next slide, like Matthew was saying earlier, I want to reiterate that comment. This is, like we say, we're concluding workshops, but I feel like all our cycles are just like workshops in progress, where we're happy to solicit additional feedback and hold it off for cycle 5 development, and any other feedback you can offer. We have debriefs, workshops, office hours, one-on-one meetings when we see you at commission meetings. So we're always soliciting feedback and hearing things like what Mike is sharing or what Marissa has shared, or what Sarkis shared earlier, is always really helpful for us in our process. So thank you so much for always being willing to step up and offer additional insight. We appreciate that. So moving on to the next slide. Thank you. So this is a proposed new addition to Section B. As a reminder, Section B lists example equity benefits that may result from inclusion and engagement strategies, such as those provided in Section C of the Equity Supplement, which we'll go over a little bit later. In addition to clarifying edits here, we have added new benefits based on project applications that we received in Cycle 3, based on feedback from you as well. I want to specifically highlight item number 7 here, especially since this was a critical benefit yielded in a few applications in the last program cycle. As a direct and indirect result of community engagement practices, there was a greater emphasis placed on ensuring first and last mile connectivity within projects, with multimodal options at transportation hubs to accommodate all types of travelers in the project area. And we just thought that this might be a great one to highlight within the equity supplement, based on whatever tools or strategies that you choose to utilize for your engagement plan. I'm going to pause for questions here. And this is exactly what we shared at the March 27th equity focus workshop. So we have not made any other changes to this section since.
I'm not seeing any hands raised right now, Naveen, and no written questions.
Okay, then we can move on to the next slide. These are proposed revisions and new additions to Section C, which provides example inclusion and engagement strategies. Again, the goal here with these revisions was to further clarify intent, which is not to simply inform communities, it is to include and engage them through the life cycle of the project development process. Based on feedback we received during the March 27th equity-focused workshop, we further specified the types of engagement strategies that may be utilized, such as direct or indirect engagement strategies. So direct strategies may include meeting with community leaders to develop relationships, whereas indirect strategies may include sending out polls to survey community needs. But combined, these strategies can result in mutually beneficial relationships and critical information for residents, community leaders, and applicant agencies alike. Continuing on to the next slide. We have further expanded the potential strategies and tactics applicants may utilize to develop or bolster their inclusion and engagement efforts. As we continue to learn, mindful and meaningful inclusion and engagement are critical to successfully advance equity in transportation planning, as well as project development and delivery to cultivate thriving, harmonious communities in our state. Again, no changes were made to this particular section of Section C since the March 27th workshop, just the initial one that was changed on the last slide or updated on the last slide. But these are some different types of strategies or tactics that can be utilized to build the larger strategy and meet those goals that you may have for your plans. I'll pause here to see if there are any questions or comments. And I do want to thank our advocates and researchers, especially for their feedback and helping to, which greatly helped us to update section B and C and amend some of that language there. So thank you for your support and assistance.
Not seeing any hands raised right now, Naveen, or no written questions.
Okay, then I think we can move on to the next slide, sorry. So this and the next two slides include our proposed revisions and new additions to the community engagement criterion, which is included in all SB1 program guidelines. The goal here is to align the information in the community engagement criterion with the proposed changes in the equity supplement. Again, these edits are focused on reducing repetition and redundancy. And if you move on to the next slide, you will see that a new addition here is to not only see whether community feedback was incorporated into the project, but to confirm whether the community was informed of how their feedback was incorporated. So closing that feedback loop, essentially, like where you engaged them, you brought them into being part of the process with you, you solicited their feedback, but then also going back and closing the loop with them, like, hey, we met with you, we conducted X amount of workshops or one-on-one sessions, or we built these types of relationships. Here's what we've done with that work. Here is what the result has been, and communicating that back with the community leadership or the community itself on what was accomplished. And if we can go on to the next slide. The other new addition to the community engagement criterion is the last paragraph that you see on this slide. Based on feedback we received during the March 27th equity-focused workshop, we have clarified that pre-existing community engagement plans can be referenced to respond to this criterion. We understand that not all agencies have the bandwidth to develop new community engagement plans, or perhaps may have developed one in the recent past. We have suggested limiting qualifying past plans to those that were developed no more than 5 years ago. This preference is based on the period often utilized by transportation and strategic plans and assumes that community demographics will not change drastically in less than 5 years' time. However, it is somewhat arbitrary, so I do want to hear from you about this proposed addition and change. Is 5 years good, or would you prefer less or more time? We'd love to hear why or why not. So if you're online and you've been listening, let us know what you think about the little highlighted section there under pre-existing community engagement plans. And I'll pause here to give you a minute to read and respond.
I'm not seeing any hands raised right now, Naveen, and not seeing any written questions or comments at this point. Oh, I must have jinxed it. Here's the hands raised.
A good jinx. Happy,
yes.
happy incidental jinx.
I always seem to do that. So Denise Sifford, you should be able to speak once you're unmuted.
Hello. Okay. So I just wanted to make sure I'm understanding this properly. It would be either community engagement plans that are completed 5 years ago, or explain, like, if we did the actual work for the engagement beyond that 5 years, that would still be allowable.
Yes. So if you developed a community engagement plan, like completed one within the last 5 years, or you've done significant amount of work, like different, like utilize certain strategies, or been doing some sort of active community engagement work, but don't have a formal plan, that would be what you would reference here. And then you would explain how and why that plan or that continued engagement is applicable, and why developing a full plan or a new plan was not feasible or not necessary. And we would ask that you provide the month and the year the existing plan was finalized and implemented.
Okay, so if we're just like identifying strategies in this plan, and then say we're actually implementing them in years like, I don't know, 6 or 7, then we could still justify the strategies identified in that plan.
Well, I guess I would clarify one thing. Do you mean that when you're submitting the project application, that your community engagement plan is incomplete or still in progress, and that you plan to complete it like year 6 or 7? I mean, does that mean that when you will be ready for construction, or what do you mean by that specific stipulation?
I mean, I would think that, like, with some of the community engagement plans, it may be that, you know, they're planned for an entire project. And so it could be that some portions of it were implemented during the design phase, other ones are through actual construction. So it may be that the actual implementable strategies in the plan span longer than just 5 years.
Yes, so then my response applies. So include that
Okay.
in your application when you're explaining it. If it's an ongoing plan with ongoing strategies that either have not yet been implemented or will be implemented, include that information in your project application narrative so that we're aware, and that at the time of application, what you've completed so far and what is coming up next. Provide that.
Awesome. No, that makes sense. Thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you. Great question, Denise.
Thanks, Naveen, and thanks for the question, Denise. So we do have one more hand raised. Steve Smith, you should be able to speak once you're unmuted.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, Steve Smith, SBCTA. So this is a really complicated question, especially for larger projects, because a lot of the community engagement to help shape a project sometimes has taken place years prior, with, you know, lots of back and forth. And I think with most of the intent of what you have here included. And so, like I say, it's really hard to pick a hard and fast number, and you're giving us the chance to kind of explain where we went, but I'm just saying that some of these go back, you know, quite a number of years, and it would be extremely difficult to change a project concept, given the amount of time and effort the community's invested. And some of these are phased projects, so the construction takes place, you know, over a number of different years and so forth. So I guess the question is, when you've got a big phase project like that maybe gets constructed over 10 years or whatever the time frame is the 5 years count from the latest phase or from the beginning, from 10 years ago, or that's why it's a complicated question here.
It's a good question, Steve, and I would say it's not a complicated question at all. I would say that yes, your question is, I think, most relevant, especially within SCCP and TCEP. So I would answer it by saying, yes, we acknowledge that a lot of the projects that compete for funds in these programs tend to be like a decade and sometimes 2 decades old or works in progress for that long. What I think we mean by, and I can further clarify this language, this is really good feedback, it's helping me a lot. I can further clarify this in the language as well and say that what we mean by no more than 5 years ago is that any recent engagement that was implemented must be in the recent past, no more than 5 years ago. So if you've had a project that's been like, has spanned like a decade or two, then it wouldn't make any sense as to why there has been no recent engagement on the project, like whether it's just informing the community about what's been going on, what changes are coming up, what's already been constructed, what's being changed or implemented, any kind of updates like that, or any kind of strategies or tactics, anything you're changing within the project, because changes do happen within the long-term projects. The goal with the community engagement plans and those strategies you incorporate to build those plans is to, throughout the project development process, through construction and completion, keep the community informed and keep them engaged, so that they're not left out of the loop until you've made decisions and moved on. So we're asking for a demonstration that if you're submitting a past previously developed community engagement plan, that there must be some recent activity done. And by recent, we mean up to 5 years ago, no more than 5 years ago. And any engagement that's been done in that. And I think 5 years was chosen, like I said, because most of the strategic plans and transportation plans that are developed are within that 5-year frame, and we're not expecting a major demographic shift in those 5 years. So you would have had an opportunity to conduct something like that, at least in the 5 years, because I think going back to the point Marissa was making earlier, it would be a bit concerning if you've had a long-term project and you haven't talked to that community in the last 5 years, not even once, or engaged with them. So hopefully that answers your question. I tried to uncomplicate my response.
Yeah, okay. Well, thank you for that. When we have a phase that's under construction, obviously there's a lot of community interaction at that point. But that's construction related community engagement, and you do find out things that you could improve in the next phase or what have you. I don't know if that would qualify, for example, or whether you're talking about really the engagement that involves possibly changing some aspect of the project, which gets.
I think both. If you're advancing something and you're incorporating community engagement or feedback as part of that process, great. If you're changing something and you're involving the community feedback as part of that process, that's great too. I think the whole crux of the argument with getting local community members and leadership included and involved in the process is that so they're aware of what's going on in their community, where it's not just passive, like here's a flyer and you've learned something, but more like, hey, we met with you, we have a built relationship with you, you're familiar that we've been building these upgrades or performing these this construction in your neighborhood for X amount of years, and here's a change that's coming up, or here's a quick update on what we've been doing in the last 2 years or 3 years, something that keeps them informed and part of the process, so that if they have questions, they know who to contact. I think one of the past public workshops I did before I was not working at the commission, that was one of the ways to engage people, is that they have a phone number or a contact person that they can call or talk to who's on the project team or who's the project lead, so that if they have concerns about the project you've been building long-term in their area, they have a relationship or a contact person or some sort of space that they can go and communicate their concern or ask questions.
Yeah, okay. Okay, that's helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. That's a good question, Steve. Thank you for asking.
Thank you, Steve. And thanks, Naveen. I'm not seeing any more hands raised, and we haven't received any written questions or comments at this point.
Okay, then this essentially concludes my presentation. I am available to respond to any questions or concerns. If you're planning to join the local partnership program workshop tomorrow, I will be there with bells on to provide this presentation again. And then we'll do it again at the SCCP workshop as well, a little bit more focused on the SCCP program as well. So if you have any questions, you can find me at those workshops, or you can contact me at naveen.habib@catc.ca.gov. My contact information is listed on the commission website as well. Thank you so much for your time and for letting me take over your workshop for a minute, Kayla.
Thank you, Naveen. And thanks everyone for the discussion and the questions. And my apologies, we thought we'd be able to give you some time back this afternoon, but after our technical difficulties, it looks like we're coming close to the end of our 2 hours. So we just have a couple of more slides to go over, Celeste, we can go ahead and move on. So here's our time now for any questions, comments, or discussion that you want to have about anything that we've covered in this workshop, or just for TCEP guidelines in general. So any general feedback, this is an opportunity for you to propose any updates that you would like us to consider. Now is the time to provide that feedback for us to be able to incorporate it in time for us to be able to get the draft guidelines out. So I'm going to go ahead and pause here, give everyone a chance to raise their hand or put any written comments or questions in the chat. We want to hear the discussion if you have it. Okay, I see hand raised. So Mars, you should be able to speak once you're unmuted now.
Yeah, thanks so much. Really appreciate all of the commission's hard work, all the staff's hard work over the past few workshops, getting feedback and updates. I think just want to uplift one more time the urgent necessity to protect disadvantaged pollution burdened communities, ensure that our public dollars are not going towards exacerbating the impacts of climate change in those communities. And I think also to that end, want to urge the commission to find ways to, continue incentivizing increasing electrified projects. I know at a previous workshop, we had some discussion around, shifting funding potentially or other methods to just ensure that we are making progress towards that just transition and towards an electrified economy.
Thank you, Mars. We appreciate the comment.
Yeah, Kayla, if you don't mind, I kind of want to address Mars' comment a little bit because I certainly appreciate it. And I know that there was some legislation that was being carried, which I understand is being held back currently, but it touches on some of these areas. And I think one thing that Kayla will mention on the next slide that isn't quite obvious to all of our stakeholders on these workshops is we've been holding office hours, and Caleb might have the specifics, but we've met with at least 3 times more zero emission infrastructure firms in our office hours this cycle to help them learn about the program, understand how to better compete with the program, and understand how to partner with public agencies in this program. And so we are not proposing to put a limit on the amount of, or I should say maybe like a floor on the amount of zero emission infrastructure projects that we do fund. But based on the interest we're getting alone, as long as the conversations I know Caltrans is currently having on some of their co-nominations, we are anticipating having considerably more zero emission infrastructure projects to evaluate in cycle 4. So a lot of the signs I think are promising and going in that direction, but we hear you loud and clear, and we know that NRDC has also been a major proponent of including some of that language as well. And we've received some comments, and we're still evaluating if there's more that can be done in the guidelines beyond putting that evaluation kind of matrix that we've put in place for zero emission infrastructure projects.
Awesome. That's super positive to hear, that there's been a lot more interest. Thanks so much.
Yeah, thank you, Mars, and thanks, Matthew. I see one more hand raised. I'm going to turn it over to Maya, who I see also submitted a question. So I'm going to assume that Maya, oh, okay. I see that you took your hand down, Maya. So I'll go ahead and read your question that you, oh, there you go. Okay, you should be able to unmute and speak now.
All right, thank you. I really appreciate the last two comments. Maya Inigo Anderson with Communities for a Better Environment. We definitely appreciate the interest in zero emission vehicle infrastructure. The other concern for our members who live primarily in environmental justice communities and the LA County area and the Bay Area is figuring out ways to protect people from potentially harmful freeway expansion, especially potentially harmful air quality impacts and displacement. We actually have a member who's currently facing displacement in the Los Angeles area due to freeway expansion. So if you could speak to the strategies for preventing those types of impacts.
Matthew or Naveen, did you want to respond to this?
Sure, I can start, and then Matthew, feel free to add in something. So Maya, I think you're speaking about, to clarify just your question, you're speaking from the community, you're speaking about community engagement from the perspective of the community member, right? Not from an applicant agency perspective. I see you came off, correct? So it really, I know people don't like hearing this response, but this is the best one I can provide, is that it depends. It depends on your local council, your leadership, who your regional transportation planning agency is. That will depend on your local and regional agencies and participation process. You can always also contact the commission if it's a project that will be submitted to us for, as part of, for example, we're in cycle 4 guidelines development right now. And when the guidelines are adopted in August, the call for projects goes out. So if you are aware of a project in your community that you don't like, or you think is harmful, or you just have something to share about it, you can always write us a letter or shoot us an email, and that will be part of the consideration. And like part of the consideration process as we evaluate applications are all the letters we receive, whether they're support or opposition, they're recorded and they're part of our public process. So they will be noticed along with any applications that we've received as part of the commission's project adoption process. Matthew, feel free to add anything I may have missed or.
Yeah, so no, Naveen, I think you hit it on the head. Obviously, community members should certainly be working with sponsors for projects in their areas and ensuring that those sponsors or potential applicants are engaging, and if that's not occurring, or if there's still a desire for additional feedback to be received or considered, the commission staff can certainly be can listen or receive comments. But in terms of actually limiting or pausing or delaying projects from proceeding, while we're evaluating projects, so from the call for projects period to when we post staff recommendations, we do not communicate with project applicants or external factors. We try to treat everything based on the application that we have in front of us. If there are projects that you see, as Naveen mentioned, moving forward in staff recommendations, at that point, you're more than welcome to reach out to commission staff that manage that specific program that might be recommending that project. And at the end of the day, we certainly encourage you to reach commissioners via public comment, which, if you've paid attention to the last handful of commission meetings, we have had several members of the public call in towards during public comment to lift up their concerns with these projects moving forward. But ultimately, it is the commissioner's decision whether to vote to approve or not approve proceeding with these projects.
Thanks, Matthew, and thank you, Maya, for the question. Just a few seconds to give anyone a chance to raise their hand or submit a written question or comment before we move on to our last two slides. I want to be mindful of everybody's time. We only have about 8 minutes left. Okay, I think we can go ahead and move on, Celeste.
Hey, Kayla, I think there's one question that's open still from Scott Strzelecki.
Yeah, I'm going to touch on that in my next slide.
Okay,
so
sounds good.
I'll go ahead and, yeah, thanks, Naveen.
I just saw it. I was like, oh, there's one open question.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. We're going to go over some milestones in our next slide, and then we'll be wrapped up. So just a really quick office hours recap. Matthew kind of alluded to this already. So we held SB1 program office hours from March through May. We still have some scheduled for the remainder of the month. The form is now closed. We're not able to schedule any further office hours at this point. We held around 30 office hour sessions that TCEP was involved in. And like Matthew said, for TCEP, we met with a variety of agencies and private entities, especially about the zero emission criteria and how those partnerships work, and to just answer general questions about our funding programs and the timelines and how they work and things like that. So that was very refreshing this cycle. It's clear now after 2 cycles of doing office hours that they're helpful and our stakeholders have interest in them. So we had even more scheduled this cycle, and I think that they were very much a success. So I'll go ahead and move on now to our last slide. So here's our cycle 4 timeline and next steps. Draft guidelines will be released for the June commission meeting. So keep your eye out on that for the emails for June commission materials. Our final guidelines will go to the August commission meeting to be voted on by our commissioners. TCEP applications will be due on November 22nd, 2024. Again, like we mentioned earlier, this date is subject to change, but right now this is the date we have picked for TCEP. SCCP and LPP will have their own dates. So right now, that's the date. It may change, but tentatively November 22nd, 2024. And then cycle 4 staff recommendations and program adoption will happen in June of 2025. And as we've mentioned before, this process really relies heavily on the discussions and the feedback that we receive and engage on with all of you, our stakeholders, and in these workshops. So our discussions with you during cycle 3 debrief sessions have really served as a launching pad to improving cycle 4 guidelines. The changes presented today culminate the cycle 4 public guidelines development process that we kicked off in December of 2023. And we have hosted 5 public workshops and over 30 individual office hour sessions during that period. Thank you for providing all your feedback effectively and timely. We really do appreciate the discussions and all of your comments and questions, whether it's in workshops or via email or via phone. And then please note that we can't make any major substantive updates or edits to the guidelines after the public workshop process has concluded. So any final feedback must be submitted to program managers by Thursday, May 30th for this to be considered by us. So please let us know if you have any feedback or changes or edits to our guidelines. I'll also pause here now. This is the time to let us know if you do. I see a question rolling in. So I'll go ahead and read this. So this is from Clarence de Guzman. Will TCEP consider being on CPUC's Section 190 grade separation program priority list as a way to fulfill the TCEP requirements of being on an RTP, etc.? Furthermore, does being on the priority list help applications to be more competitive?
So
Go ahead, Matthew.
Yeah, Kayla, let me answer that because
Yeah.
So no, it will not fulfill the TCEP requirement of being on a regional transportation plan. The requirement to being listed in a regional transportation plan is statutory. And I appreciate that because we've been, and Kayla, forgive me for stepping in. I've gotten that question a few different ways, so I just have to be very clear. The RTPA requirement is very specific. In terms of being on a priority list across other programs, please include that information in your narrative. There are sections in the evaluation criteria that demonstrate that a project has coordinated support. So that's either from other state agencies, regional agencies, or local agencies. So in the example you give, you would be able to say that the Public Utilities Commission is prioritizing such a project, but we need to be very careful. There is no replacement for being considered as listed in a regional transportation plan.
Thanks, Matthew. Any feedback or questions or comments? We have 3 minutes left, so happy to hear them. I'll pause here. And you can always shoot me and Matthew an email, or my colleague Ken Lopez, who's also on the TCEP team, and we're happy to receive feedback that way also. Again, by next Thursday would be ideal for us to be able to consider anything into our draft guidelines. Okay, I'm not seeing any hands raised. Oh, I do see a question actually, so let's hold off, Celeste, on moving on. So Clarence asked, can previously TCEP funded projects reapply to new cycles? So I'm going to ask Matthew to come on for this because the answer is yes, but there may be different situations.
So the answer is yes if it's new scope. So if you funded an earlier segment that had independent utility and you've delivered that segment and you're proposing an additional segment that has independent utility, yes, you can reapply for Trade Corridor Enhancement Program funding. If you have a TCEP funded project that you have experienced cost increases and it can no longer be delivered as expected, you cannot request additional TCEP funds in a future cycle. And there's a section in funding restrictions on the TCEP guidelines that prohibits this program from funding cost increases, which is the circumstance that you're describing. The only exception to that rule is for Caltrans nominated projects. Caltrans has discretion to support supplemental funding out of their own Caltrans state portion of TCEP funds in a future funding cycle. But in the instance that you are not Caltrans nominated or Caltrans has not agreed to support the cost increases with supplemental funds, the only way you can reapply with a project is if it's for a new scope with independent utility.
Thanks, Matthew, and thanks for the question, Clarence. Celeste, we can go ahead and move on to the final slide. So thanks again to everybody for the feedback and the discussion today. Thank you to Naveen for joining us to go over community engagement updates. Again, please get us any edits or feedback or questions or comments in the next week for us to be able to consider it into our draft. Our emails are up there. You can reach out to one of the 3 of us or all 3 of us, whatever you choose. And then because of our technical difficulties today, I just want to give a reminder that we do post our recordings of our workshops. So we will have this posted probably in the next week or so onto our TCEP workshop page and our workshops webpage on the CTC website. I'm assuming probably in 2 parts because it ended halfway through. So keep your eye out for that. Or if you ever need a link, you can go ahead and email me and I can send it to you directly. So any final questions or comments? I'll give it a second, but we're at 3 p.m. So I just want to be mindful of everyone's afternoon. Okay, not seeing any. Well, thank you for joining us. We appreciate all your feedback and for you spending a couple of hours with us today.